Hello friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead bringing you another Pantry Meals video as part of our Three Rivers Challenge 2025 series. This past week marked me pretty much being back to full-time momming after giving birth to our 9th child in the beginning of January. This week we were back to homeschool with the little ones. I'm back to running kids to extracurricular activities, so I needed quick, convenient meals as I eased back into my full-time job postpartum as a mom of 9. So you're going to be seeing a lot of those meals here. I've always said I am not a professional chef. I'm not proclaiming to have the greatest recipes or the best looking foods. What you're going to get here on my channel are authentic meals from a busy mom of 9 who purposes to feed my family the best ingredients grown on our homestead or sourced locally, and I'm just doing my best to bring those to you. You'll notice that a lot of the meals I'm bringing to you are mostly breakfasts and I guess the meals that I put together that require recipes. A lot of our meals are just simply a protein source with a side of vegetables and some kind of starch like a potato that we fry up. And it would get really redundant and boring if I brought you every single one of those meals because there's nothing really unique or interesting about them. So you're not seeing a lot of the, I guess, regular old dinners that we make that are just meat, veggie, and starch. I'm trying to share more of the recipe meals that I have, which mostly end up being breakfast and a lot of the like soups that we make for lunch, and showing you the ways that we're using the foods that we preserved here on YouTube with you last summer. So just wanted to let you know that we are eating our fair share of vegetables and meats and dinners and things. If you feel like I'm just showing you a lot of baking and breakfast, it's because I guess I feel like those are the more interesting meals to share. You all know how to make meat and warm up vegetables. So this was my meal plan for this week. You can see everything that I had planned to make. I'm not necessarily married to my meal plan. I like to list everything that I would like to make that week, but sometimes things happen. I make a list of the ingredients that I need in order to complete those meals, and we shop for them down in the cellar and in the freezer. And I just like to have all of the components for those meals in my kitchen as I begin the week. And then I can mix and match and maybe switch lunches or switch dinners if things come up during the week and one of the meals on the list seems more convenient to make on a different day. And then, of course, like I've shown you many times, I have to take my inventory and cross off everything that I pulled up from the cellar or the freezers to make sure my inventory remains up to date. And you guys can find more info on this in the video description. We're going to start our meals this week. I want to show you how I'm using my freeze-dried eggs. This is 1 dozen eggs that I freeze-dried in August of 2023. You can see they just had an oxygen absorber in the Mylar, and I did this using my freeze dryer, obviously. The ratio is for every, I guess it's equal parts water and freeze-dried ingredients. So 2 tablespoons of freeze-dried powder equals 1 egg, and to that I add 2 tablespoons of cold water for raw ingredients. I would use hot water if these were cooked eggs. And you just add so the equal ratio of eggs to water, and you stir them around, and then you're going to want to let them sit for a while. But first I like to use my immersion blender to just make sure I smooth out any of those chunks that were in there just to get a really good consistency. And then I let this sit for about 5 to 10 minutes to thicken up. In the meantime, on this day, while it's thickening, I took some leftover, these were homemade whole grain buns that I had made in last week's video with you, and just put some strawberry jam on those. I'm also squeezing the last of the navel oranges from our big bulk fresh citrus order that we had done in January. I'm really sad to see all that citrus go, but we really enjoyed it while we had it. My eggs have soaked up, rehydrated all of that water, so I can pour them into my hot cast iron pan with a little bit of oil in it. and you can see how nicely seasoned cast iron really does make making scrambled eggs super easy. You can see I do use metal on my cast iron. I find it doesn't affect the seasoning if I'm not scraping it super hard. We're just going to add a little bit of pepper to those freeze-dried eggs, and here was our breakfast on this morning. So we have our rolls, our orange juice, and our freeze-dried scrambled eggs. And as you can see, there's no difference between these freeze-dried scrambled eggs and raw scrambled eggs that you would eat. So we freeze dry eggs when we have a lot of them, when the hens are laying an abundance of eggs in the spring and the summer. I like to freeze dry them, and then they're like an insurance policy. I have those in storage for those times. Like right now, my hens are only maybe giving me 4 eggs or so a day. And if we're doing a lot of baking on one particular day, we can run through the fresh eggs pretty quickly. So using up some of those freeze-dried eggs to make scrambled egg breakfasts is super helpful. Now I'm going to show you how I'm using those freeze-dried eggs in some baking. So I decided to make some zucchini bread as a dessert for a dinner that I was making. I had frozen portions, 2-cup portions of shredded zucchini specifically for this recipe because my zucchini bread calls for 2 cups. And I'm going to double the recipe. I have some more freeze-dried eggs. This batch is from 2022, and I didn't label exactly how many I had in this package. It's looking like it's a little more than 1 dozen. So I'm just going to put them in a jar, and I'm going to take out what I need to complete my zucchini bread recipe. To double it, I'm going to need the total of 6 eggs, and 2 tablespoons of powder equals 1 egg, so we're going to need 12 total tablespoons of the powder in order to equal the 6 eggs that I'm going to need in my recipe. And then of course to that I would need to add 12 tablespoons of cold water, and just like I did for the scrambled eggs, we're going to mix that together, and then we're going to set that aside while we work on the other ingredients for our zucchini bread. I am going to grind my grains fresh. While the wheat berries are running through the grain mill, I'm going to work on my other ingredients. I used 2.5 cups of sugar, and to that I'm adding my baking powder, just 2 teaspoons of baking powder. We're going to do 2 teaspoons of salt, and then we're going to add our cinnamon. This recipe calls for quite a bit of cinnamon. I believe I did 6 teaspoons. And now our flour has all run through the grain mill. It's all fresh and ready to go. I think the recipe called for 4 cups of flour, but when I grind it fresh, I always add a little bit of extra. So I ended up putting in probably the equivalent of about 6 cups of the freshly ground flour. Those are all our dry ingredients that we're mixing together. Now my eggs have all rehydrated, and you can see they're just like raw eggs that would have been mixed together. We're just going to add that into our dry mixture, putting in a little bit of vanilla extract, maybe 1 to 2 teaspoons. And then I have my melted fat here. Now we're adding just a little bit of extra water, and then here is our thawed shredded zucchini. I love shredding this. This was from last year's garden. Shredding it and freezing it like this saves you so much time and makes such easy zucchini bread in the winter like this, because I find that shredding the vegetables is what takes the most time and is usually what makes me not want to make something like zucchini bread. So if I have it pre-shredded, I do the work in the summer, and then it makes it so much easier in the winter to just bake these treats for my family. So I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees, and we're just going to pop that in. And that is what we had for dessert. I'll show you what we had for dinner on that day. I made some homemade lemonade. We had some of last year's garden green beans that were steamed, and then just some beef roasts. And that was just a super easy dinner, and the kids truly enjoyed that zucchini bread. They obviously loved the lemonade with it too. So that's an idea of some of the things we're eating for dinner lately. Now let's move on to another dinner. So this is some shredded cabbage. I've shown you this in other videos. Or not shredded, it's chopped cabbage, and I just freeze it like that, chopped, and I'll stick it in a cast iron pan with some oil to thaw and saute. We are going to have some cod on this evening for dinner. I felt like we've been eating a lot of beef and pork and we need a little bit more fish. So I have my cod all thawed, and I also thawed out some garlic scape pesto. This was from last year's garden. It's garlic scapes, basil, cashews, lemon juice, and olive oil all blended together into a pesto. And I thought that this would be delicious on top of our cod. So I'm just kind of spreading that over the top of the cod, and then we're going to bake this in the oven on 350 degrees. Cod doesn't take very long, it takes maybe 20 minutes. I'm just going to give it a little bit of salt and pepper on top before we put it in the oven. And then in the meantime, while that's baking, I have 2.5 quarts of applesauce here. We are going to warm up on the stove. This was one of those days where little Miss Abby just wanted to be held during my time that I make dinner. So I'm finding that baby wearing is the only way that I can get certain things done these days, and it's nice to have her snuggled there while I cook. So here is what our cod looked like coming out of the oven. I had also mashed up some potatoes. There's our sauteed cabbage, and then our applesauce. And it's maybe not the most attractive meal, but it was very nutrient dense, very filling, and just a wonderful meal on one of these cold February nights. I was happy to eat some fish. Like I said, I've been defaulting to kind of serving a lot of beef and pork, and I forget that we have fish in the freezer that needs to be used up too, so I'm trying to incorporate that into more of our meal plans. Let's move on to yet another breakfast. This was a morning where I didn't have all of my children home, so if you're wondering this looks like small portions, that's because not everybody was here to eat this breakfast. So I'm making a smaller breakfast. I'm used to cooking for an army every day. So I had some more of those leftover rolls from last week, and I'm just kind of cubing that bread up and sticking that in my greased pie dish here. And then I also took an apple and I'm going to chop that up. I'm making kind of a bread pudding, or what we call a French toast casserole, but I like to add some apples to it just to do something different on this morning. Here are some raw eggs. I told you we are getting some eggs from our hens, and I'm using those up on this morning. Added a little bit of almond milk, adding some cinnamon and some nutmeg, just sort of measuring with my heart. And we're going to get that all whisked together and then simply pour that over the top of our bread and apple mixture. I have the oven preheated to 350 degrees, and this will bake. It usually takes about 35 to 40 minutes to totally bake. But before we put it in the oven, I want to make sure to press down all of those breadcrumbs and apples to make sure they're submerged under the egg mixture, or they will burn and blacken while they're in the oven. So we put that in, and then this is what it looked like when it was all done. Just a super easy meal. This is the last of the grapefruit. We might have just a little bit left, but this was the last of the raw grapefruit that we ate. And then I cooked up some sausage for the kids so they'd have a little protein with it. Everybody drizzles a little bit of maple syrup over the French toast casserole. And this was just a really easy breakfast for the kids that we had home on this day to eat. Another day, I am thawing these are some homegrown steaks. I grabbed a bag of storage potatoes. I've shown you how I like to store them in those mesh bags that I get from Amazon. And we are going to bake something to go along with our dinner here. We have lots of pie filling downstairs, but I just haven't been in the mood for baking pies. So I'm going to show you how I'm using some of my canned pie filling. I added my flour. I did 3 cups of the whole grain flour, the equivalent of 3 cups of flour. Then I added 3 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and now we need to add our wet ingredients. I am adding almond milk. So we're going to add about 2 cups of that, a little bit of vanilla, and then we're just going to mix that together. And this is the fruit cobbler recipe that I make all the time, but you can see that I omitted the sugar from it because the canned pie filling that I'm going to put on the top of this has sugar in it already. So it would have been overkill if I put sugar in the batter as well. I did end up adding just a little bit of water because that freshly ground flour, it just rehydrates a little differently than pre-ground flour, so it needed a little bit of extra water. I'm just going to grease my baking dish. I put the batter on the bottom, and then we're going to open up that pie filling and just pour it right on top of the batter that we made. I have lots of pie filling down there. This one is strawberry pie filling. I believe I canned this for you guys in a video last fall. And I'm just simply pouring it over the top of the batter, and then I'll take my spatula to kind of even it out and spread it a little bit, put that in the oven on 350 degrees, and that is going to make a delicious dessert to go along with this meal. So like I said, I feel silly just showing you tutorials of a lot of the dinners that we're making, because most of them are just meat and something like potatoes or rice with a side of some type of vegetable that we've preserved. Sometimes it's just a canned veggie that we're dumping out, and sometimes I actually cook a frozen veggie. So on this day we had our steaks. I had some cauliflower and carrots that we steamed. These were some frozen peppers and some onions that we sauteed in some bacon grease. Have some peppers, or I'm sorry, some potatoes that we fried up, and here is that strawberry cobbler. So let me show you what a plate of that looked like. This was a really yummy dinner. I am craving steak ever since I gave birth, so any day I have steak is a good day. And this is what that strawberry pie filling cobbler looked like. It ended up very cake-like because of the fresh ground flour. It was delicious. Another day, another breakfast. That means I'm using my grain mill as an alarm clock early in the morning, grinding my flour for the morning's breakfast, and using this grinder usually is what wakes the children up and gets them moving and started on their chores while I work on breakfast for them. So we are going to make some carrot cake muffins on this particular morning. I'm going to start with some freeze-dried eggs. Just like I did with the zucchini bread, I'm taking out the powder, adding the equivalent amount of water, and we are just going to whip that up with the immersion blender to make sure there are no chunks of eggs in there. And then we have that flour that we just ground down, and we're very excited. I haven't made these muffins in a really long time. Added our sugar. Now we're going to add our baking powder. We're going to add a little bit of cinnamon. We've been going through a lot of cinnamon. I had to add, open up a new bag from the cellar this week and pour it into my jar up in the kitchen. We added our salt. We're going to mix that together. You guys can check the video description for the exact recipe for these muffins. To this, we're going to add our fat. I am using avocado oil. When I was in the cellar over the weekend, I realized I have lots of cans of this coconut cream I had bought to make homemade ice cream with, and I haven't been using a lot of it, so these are getting close to their best by, use by date, so I'm going to work through these, and that coconut cream is what I'm using for the liquid in these muffins. Added my vanilla extract, and these are frozen shredded carrots from last summer's preservation. I just had them vacuum sealed, and once again, just like with the zucchini, having these pre-shredded, like it would take me 15 minutes to shred up all those carrots if I were doing it in the morning, so I just wouldn't make these muffins if I had to shred them in the morning. So having them pre-shredded like that made it super easy. I had put the frozen carrots in the fridge the night before, and they were thawed by the time I woke up. So that is such a time saver. These are the kinds of things I have to do in order to be able to bake things like this for the kids so early in the morning, because I have the baby fussing and wanting to be nursed. So it took me maybe 12 minutes to get these muffins in the oven versus I would have had to add an extra 15 minutes if I had to shred the carrots fresh. So such a time saver. And then I have the rest of these freeze-dried eggs that I didn't use in the muffins. So we're just going to add water and go ahead and cook these up just like I did earlier in this video. And that will be our protein source to serve with our muffins that we're making. And then these were the last of the grapefruits. There weren't enough for everybody to have a grapefruit for breakfast, so I just decided to juice what was left. And then the kids just get a tiny little cup of juice, but they like that. You don't need too much juice, especially because we're already having sugar in the muffins. So we got our protein in the eggs, got a little juice for our vitamin C, and we have some delicious carrot cake muffins. So I rely on my crock pot so much lately in order to get meals on the table, especially on busy activity nights. So one night this week I had thrown some chicken in the crock pot with a little bit of Italian seasoning. I chopped up some onions, just a really simple dinner. And like I said, I feel silly doing a tutorial on any of these kinds of meals because there's nothing special about this. We all know how to throw some chicken in the crock pot, right, and cook it up. I did put a little bit of the brine from some pickled banana peppers, and that gave it a little something extra. But so my point in sharing this wasn't that meal, but I want to show you how I'm going to use the leftovers from that meal to make a lunch on the next day. So the first thing I need to do is make some mayonnaise. I put 1 egg in the bottom of my jar, and I'm squeezing in a little bit of lemon juice because I have a fresh lemon. I did pick that seed out that just fell in there. You could use apple cider vinegar if you don't have a lemon. Add a little bit of salt. I like to add a little bit of yellow mustard, and then I'm adding approximately a half a cup to 3/4 of a cup of avocado oil. Avocado oil makes a nice mayo, or regular olive oil. Do not use extra virgin olive oil, or sometimes you get a really weird, strong olive taste, or sometimes almost like a rancid taste if I use extra virgin. But you can see we just use the immersion blender, and then we get a nice creamy homemade mayonnaise that I can use to make chicken salad out of this leftover chicken that I showed you. So I'm picking out some of the chicken that the kids didn't finish with last night's dinner, and I'm actually going to put it in my mixer to shred it up. So just taking some of that. I have plans for the rest of that for a different lunch later on this week. Now I'm going to open up a couple jars of pickled goodies. These are pickled red onions that I made last year, and I thought this was a good opportunity to use some of those. Those smell amazing. The brine in that is going to make a delicious salad dressing once we have lettuce growing again here soon. This other jar here is pickled celery. And since we don't have fresh celery available, pickled celery works great in your chicken salad. Then I'm just going to put in about half of that mayonnaise and see how it does. I'm going to end up adding the rest of the mayonnaise later on because it just wasn't wet enough once it all shredded up. Just need to add a little bit of salt and pepper. And then, like I said, I'm just going to turn on my mixer and let that shred the meat up for me. So things like being able to make your own mayonnaise is really helpful during a pantry challenge because you can use other pantry staples that you have available if you didn't store enough mayonnaise. And I find that the homemade mayonnaise tastes better and is healthier for you anyways. So I finished up mixing that together, decided to add a little bit of paprika for a little bit of spice. And this made a wonderful lunch and kept me from wasting the leftover chicken from the crock pot that night before. I just chopped up some storage carrots, and then we have 2 quarts here of canned pears. And then I ended up grabbing, I have a couple packages, maybe 3 packages left of these rice cakes that are down in the cellar. And since I didn't have time to make bread that day, I thought that the kids could eat their chicken salad on the rice cakes, and it ended up working well. Some kids wanted it on top of the rice cake, and some of them eat it on the side. So, love a good chicken salad. It didn't last long. What the kids didn't eat this day, I ate for breakfast the next day. The next day's lunch, I took 2 quarts of, this was corn and chicken chowder. I used a ball canning recipe for this, and I made this in a video with you last summer, and I grabbed a bag of those convenience potatoes that I buy in bulk from Azure Standard. I needed a quick and easy lunch. As I mentioned, this was my first week since having the baby that I am back to full-time homeschool mom. My older kids have been back to school since the beginning of the new year, since they're primarily independent and need me very little, just for some grading and helping with lessons here and there. But this was my first week back with my little ones, who require me to be sitting right there with them one-on-one working through the whole school day. So I needed something really easy. And this also allowed me to add the rest of the chicken from the crock pot to this meal. And I was able to whip up this lunch in like 10 minutes and get it on the stove. Busy homeschool moms need convenience food, and these soup bases have been such a blessing for me through this postpartum season. Next thing I'm going to make is just some meatballs with some pasta that I'm trying to use up. So I grabbed my ground beef. This was homegrown ground beef from some heifers that we just picked up from the butcher. I added some Italian seasoning, and we're going to add some salt and pepper and some eggs. And I'm just going to mix that together, and don't worry, I did wash my hands after touching this raw meat. Sometimes if you don't mention that you washed your hands, people will comment about it. So just because I didn't show myself washing my hands, don't think that means I didn't actually wash them. So I am turning these into some meatballs, and this is just going to be a really quick and easy meal on this day. And I need, like I said, I need easy right now. We're in a season of life where that's what I need. So I can just dump a jar of home canned tomato sauce on top. And then this is an opportunity to use up some of the freeze-dried herbs that I have. Here is some basil from last year's garden that have been dried. We're just going to sprinkle a little bit of that on top. We're going to do some oregano. We're also going to do salt and pepper, of course. And then I was able to cover this and just throw this in the oven and let that cook while I went back to tending to the children. And then I have a lot of things, like store-bought things that are not my favorite, that are in the pantry that I really need to be intentional about using up right now. And this is an example of that. Here's some boxes. I had gotten these from Aldi thinking they were a gluten-free pasta option. I have 2 different kinds here, and I'm just going to be honest. These are not my favorite, but we're not going to waste them. We are going to use them. So I decided to combine both boxes and just get them out of the house and get them used up, just so I don't have to think about them anymore. That's the great thing about a pantry challenge, is that it is an opportunity to use up some of that stuff that otherwise you'd be like, I don't really like that, I'm not going to use it. But since, we don't really have a lot of other options, this is the time where I'm going to actually use those things. So that is how that meal turned out. Okay, guys, that's it for this week. As always, I will be back next week with another meals video for you. In the meantime, I hope that you will check out the hashtag, and everybody else, all the other content creators that are participating and sharing their meals and all of their wonderful ideas with you, just click on the hashtag in the video title. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. We will be back next week, friends. Bye.